what do you think the definition of a hotspot should be?
Well, look, I will leave that to the National Cabinet this morning, but there needs to be a definition. There needs to be some objective criteria on the pathway out. We can't have this open-ended arrangement where state borders are going to be closed for months and who knows? I mean, in some people's minds, years on end. I mean, it might well be. I mean, we're all hoping for a vaccine, a safe and effective, proven vaccine, and as soon as we can secure that, I mean, that'll be great. But in the absence of a vaccine, there's got to be a predictable pathway out, giving people certainty and hope about the future. And, this indiscriminate, arbitrary political decision-making around keeping borders closed without any particular specific objective reasons it's entirely unreasonable, and it imposes excessive harm on people. State border closures as a tool to protect people's health are, of course, appropriate, but it's got to be based on objective medical advice, not on politically based decision-making.
What's the point of declaring a hotspot, though, if premiers, including the WA Premier, as we just said, as well as the Queensland Premier, what's the point of a hotspot if they don't adopt it?
Well, what's the point of state border closures if there is no risk against which the population needs to be protected? I mean, in the end, I mean, you can't have arbitrary decision-making imposing deliberate harm on the economy, on jobs, on families, in terms of their capacity to catch up with each other for no or very little public health upside. I mean, there's got to be a reason for it. And there's got to be a context and an objective criteria which determines when those state border restrictions can be eased. It's not a matter of saying, let's open those state borders now to everyone, but it's a matter of saying, well, state border closures are appropriate in these circumstances, but as soon as we get ourselves into this position, where state borders can be closed in a way that is COVID safe, then that will be done as soon as possible. And at the moment, some premiers are not prepared to explain themselves to the community, and that means that creates a lot of uncertainty and anxiety across large sections of the Australian community.
Well, Queensland says that they're not going to open up the border with New South Wales until there are 28 days without community transition of the virus. I mean, is that even possible?
Well, look. Again, I mean, I'm not going to go into the specific conversations that will take place at the National Cabinet today, but the approach here needs to be proportionate, it needs to be practical, and it needs to be commonsensical. And at the moment, there is a lot of arbitrary, politically driven decision-making that is imposing disproportionate harm on our economy and on jobs and on people's livelihoods for no or very little public health upside. And this is, I mean, it's just very disappointing to see that politics seems to be driving a lot of this.
Now, I said community transition then. I meant to say community transmission, of course.
Now, I got what you meant.
Minister, pretty sobering details this week, new figures that came out when it comes to us being in a recession for the first time in 30 years. Business is crying out for a plan. What's your plan?
Well, we have been working to a plan all the way through. I mean, the plan in the first phase, we, of course, had to get on top of the virus as swiftly as we could. We had to make sure our health system was in place to deal with any inflow of patients. We did that. We provided crisis-level support into the economy to help save as many businesses as possible, help keep as many employees connected to their employers as possible. We're now working on the sensible transition all the way through. We've provided incentives to business to invest in their future growth and success, through the tax system. We are focused on our deregulation agenda. We're focused on our skills and training agenda. We're focused on bringing down the cost of electricity to help businesses be more successful into the future. We're focused on giving businesses better access to key markets around the world to sell Australian products and services. I mean, in the end, I tell you what our plan is. Our plan is to restore as many jobs as possible, as soon as possible, to create new jobs. And the way you achieve that is by helping businesses be the most successful they can be. And so, I mean, 9 out of 10 working Australians work for private sector business. And, we are absolutely totally focused on making sure that businesses have the best possible opportunity to be successful, so they invest in their future growth and success and can create more jobs. And that is why across the whole policy gamut, across the whole of the government, we are doing everything we can to create the conditions for businesses to start growing.
But a lot of those conditions, a lot of what you just said there, I mean, it's going to take time for that to be able to see some benefits. So what's the immediate plan? What are you going to do to try and see results as fast as possible?
Well, I just told you what we've done immediately. I mean, we provided massive immediate decisions, putting more than $300 billion of stimulus and support into the Australian economy, 16% of GDP. But we are working both on the short term, the transitional, and the medium to long term response at the same time. I mean, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. In the budget, we will have our next installment of our 5-year plan for the strongest possible economic and jobs recovery, and that goes across all of the policy levers. But I mean, we've been doing this all the way through. I mean, we've been doing this in the first 6 years of government, which is why we went into this crisis in a stronger fiscal and economic position than many other countries around the world, and more strongly than we would have if we hadn't done all that work. We have provided a massive crisis response. We're working sensibly on transitioning ourselves into the new normal, and we are working on the longer-term plan to strengthen or to maximise the strength of the economy.
OK, well, tax cuts, stage 2 and stage 3 tax cuts, first of all, will they be brought forward to next year?
Well, look, you know that the budget will be delivered on the 6th of October. I'm not going to talk you through.
Just give me a little bit, Minister.
What I can say,
give me a little bit.
Well, I mean, we've already said we're clearly considering what we can do in the tax space. We're clearly considering what we can sensibly do in terms of bringing forward personal income tax relief for working families, and we're also looking very carefully what we can do to provide further incentives through the tax system to businesses to invest in their future growth and success.
I'll tell you what, I mean, you're an economic conservative. Given the amount of money that you're throwing at the problem at the moment, it makes what Labor did during the GFC a bit of an economic entree, doesn't it?
Well, at a time of crisis, and this is a real crisis, I mean, if you look at the economic hit all around the world, the economic, I mean, in the UK, 20% contraction in GDP in the June quarter. I mean, in Australia, 7% contraction. I mean, at a time of crisis, of course, it's important for governments to step up without hesitation. But it's also important for governments, when they're not in a crisis context, as we weren't before this crisis, to do everything we can to put ourselves in the strongest, most resilient position when it comes to fiscal policy settings. And we did that. We repaired our budget over 6 years. We got the budget back into balance in 2018-19. We were on track for a surplus this financial year and moving forward all the way through the medium term. And that stood us in good stead. I, as an economic conservative, I absolutely have got no hesitation to step up, even as required in the context of a real crisis. Well, these are the moments when governments do have to step up.
Well, realistically, though, how long can the giveaways last for?
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, when you're hit with an unexpected crisis, you do have to take some drastic measures to pause and support people as appropriate. But you then also need to transition yourself out of what is an unsustainable level of spending as swiftly as you can to get yourself into the new normal and onto the base from which you can grow again without these sorts of distortions created by excessive fiscal stimulus if it is provided on an ongoing basis. We do have to phase out of this crisis level support back into the new normal. We've got to let the economy adjust. We need to let businesses adjust to the new conditions, and we've got to find out which businesses have a viable and profitable future and which ones don't, and so that we can ensure that people are working in real jobs, in the most productive jobs for the economy possible.
Just finally, Minister, Tony Abbott's causing a bit of a stir over in the UK. He's been called homophobic, he's been called sexist, he's been called a misogynist, including from Nicola Sturgeon overseas at the moment. I'm just wondering what you make of their criticisms of him.
Look, Tony Abbott is a distinguished former Prime Minister who provided great service to Australia. Of course, throughout a political career where you're engaged in a battle of ideas, people that can be willing from time to time in a domestic context. In the end, the decisions in the UK on who they appoint into what position are entirely a matter for them. But from where I sit, Tony Abbott, is clearly a giant of Australian politics who's made a great contribution over a long time. Not everybody will agree with him, but people are entitled to their views, and that's the way things work in a democracy.